Hello, Chris Lee and Brandon Bigsby here. Joey Dwyer got Wally pipped today, which didn't go unnoticed. Anyway, all kidding aside, here to talk about Vanderbilt's 31-point win over Tennessee Tech, which feels strange because it wasn't really a 31-point game. Vanderbilt kind of separated late in the game, and as Mark Byington pointed out, that's the team that took Georgia down to the wire, was within a few points of UCF late. So it was one of those weird games where it didn't feel impressive most of the day, but at the end of the day, that's a nice win when you look at the final score and how it was done.
Yeah, I think that was one of those games where you kind of went in before the last 5 minutes and felt like, man, maybe there was something a little bit left to be desired, despite Vanderbilt pretty much leading most of this game and the scoreboard being what it was. It just felt like a lot of the little things that actually really plagued them in that Drake game was kind of plaguing them a little bit. The lack of interior presence, they were missing some open shots, a couple of late and missed rotations on the defensive end, and then all of a sudden, the last 6 or 7 minutes, Vanderbilt just pretty much took over. It was a 15 or 16 point game, and then all of a sudden we look up and there's 2 minutes left, they're up by 30. So I think that the score maybe flattered Vanderbilt a little bit in this one, but nevertheless, Tennessee Tech, as you mentioned, really tough team out of the OVC that could maybe catch the eyes of a smaller conference. Not a bad win for Vanderbilt, especially with Virginia Tech on the horizon.
Yeah, for sure. Didn't feel like a 30-point game. Felt more like a 15-point game, which is about what it was, I don't know, with maybe 10 minutes to play. Vanderbilt kind of finally got a little separation. 2 plays that A.J. Hoggard made stood out. I think he had a 3, and then McLaughlin grabbed a rebound on this end, threw a baseball pass, a really good one to Hoggard for the layup, and they just kind of coasted from there. But I guess not a game where a lot stood out statistically. I think maybe the biggest thing was Jason Edwards coming off the bench, and we asked Mark Byington about that afterwards, and he said, don't really care who starts. It doesn't matter that much. But whatever happened, Edwards got 23 points, was a big part of what they did today. They went with Edwards and Hoggard as their starting guards. Hoggard and Huffman, and then brought in Tyler Tanner and Edwards around the same time. So I don't know if that's going to be something in the rotation going forward, but it was interesting to see that off the jump.
Yeah, and you have to remember, too, Edwards actually came out for about 4 or 5 minutes, too, when he looked like he got a bit of a knock on his knee, had to go to the locker room and went to the trainer for a little bit, came back a little bit later in that first half, but those were some minutes that he had missed out on at a point where he was really shooting the ball well and was starting to get his rhythm going. So I think him doing what he was doing was really impressive. And then A.J. Hoggard as well, 15 points, 11 of them being in the second half. Kind of felt like he really charged that Vanderbilt run coming out of halftime, scored 9 of the 13-2 run they had against Tennessee Tech. And we asked him in the press conference, he said, I wouldn't have even known it if you didn't just tell me. So to see him really coming along as someone that a lot of people felt would be a critical piece along with Edwards, really, really encouraging to see those two specifically really step up and take that step forward here in this one.
Yeah, Hoggard led them with 4 assists today. Also hit a couple of nice mid-range jumpers. He's got a kind of a good game with that. In the first half, when they were kind of struggling to separate, they go into halftime up 9, which I think was the biggest margin. But yeah, I think that defensively they kind of clamped down. You know, they didn't score. They had a little spurt when the team was scoring much, but Tech wasn't scoring either. I felt like Vanderbilt was doing a good job of maybe sealing off the boards. Tech is a horrible rebounding team, so take that for what it's worth. But end of the day, you know, McLaughlin comes off a little bit of a minor injury, comes out, grabs 14 boards today. You know, Tyler Tanner gave them a spark in the second half. I guess we look at this team kind of as an offense-first team, and because of the way they play, but you go back and think about it, the defense was pretty good today, other than some problems that Mark Byington pointed out with closing out early. It was a solid day for them.
Yeah, and I think that you're kind of slowly but seeing this team become more comfortable with each other on the defensive end. I remember the first game of the year against SEMO, things looked so disorganized and just out of sync. You kind of tell they weren't really comfortable with one another defensively. Not even necessarily that these guys aren't good defenders. I think they have a group of capable defenders, but you have 11 or 12 transfers coming in, all in a new system. It takes time for that to gel. And I mean, Mark Byington, he said it in the first practice in September when we talked to him that they didn't work a lot on defense during the summer. So I think you're just now starting to see them kind of hit that level of comfort. We saw a little bit of that in spurts, especially in that Seton Hall game in Charleston. I think we're starting to see them come together. I'm not saying this is a spectacular defensive team, but I think it's one that is at least passable when you consider the offensive production they have.
Well, it was interesting because we're sitting here talking about a a 31-point win against a team that I don't think has been beaten by that many all year, and again played some quality teams. UCF beat Texas A&M in its opener and just beat this team by 11. Again, Tech was right there with that team, but you watch them and look, it is a team you watch the rest of the SEC. They're not Auburn, they're not Alabama, they're not Kentucky, they're not Tennessee. I'm not sure they're the next level down, which is probably Florida, Mississippi State, but they're a team that a lot of years, from my vantage point, they win a few close games, they might be good enough to sneak into the NCAA. Well, time will tell on that, but I feel like there's still a level of performance from them we haven't seen. I mean, we watched him take some open threes, as Carey had a couple, and he's got a nice, gentle shot. It's a soft shot, just didn't go down. Tyler Nichols still, other than that one game, hasn't really come on the way he can. I do feel like offensively, there's a gear for them. They're going to hit some night against somebody that they've not quite hit yet, other than maybe a half here or there.
Yeah, I think someone else that we were talking about while we were watching as well that we've yet to see really take that step is MJ Collins on both ends. A really good defender that at the end of last year against Virginia Tech really stepped up for them during their late little run in February and March and became arguably their second best player through a lot of that stretch. So I think there's a few guys where they have a level, maybe two levels that we haven't really seen them hit yet. And it's still just late November. It's Black Friday, so there's a lot of time for them to get there. No better time for them to maybe do that than in a couple of days against arguably one of their better opportunities to build their resume up against Virginia Tech and Tyler Nichols and MJ Collins' former school as well. But I have to agree with you. There is another level I think this team hasn't hit. I still don't know if they're in that first or even second tier of the SEC, but that upper third tier where you typically see a lot of these SEC teams battling for bubble position come February, it feels like this is a group that is capable of that, especially as they continue to kind of grow and come along and find their identity. Yeah,
well, their upside is definitely going to be capped by the interior. And look, they thought they'd have Kajani Wright this year. He would have helped them. That's probably not going to happen. Jalen Carey, or particularly McLaughlin, is playing really well, but he's 6'7", 6'8". So their upside is capped there. When you get into the league and you face Janai Broome and Big Cliff at Alabama and all the bigs in this league, that might look a little differently. But they do some things with controlling tempo and pace and the shooting. And they're also deep. And you mentioned MJ Collins. I'm not sure he played the first half or didn't play much. I mean, they at least have some parts. They go 9-10 guys who can reasonably play at this level, and I think that's going to be a thing that's going to end up helping them.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Mark Byington has mentioned a lot that he loves about this team is just the depth that they have, especially at that guard spot. It doesn't always have to be Jason Edwards or AJ Hoggard. It might be Tyler Nichols one night or MJ Collins or Tyler Tanner. And that's something that I think is so different about this Vanderbilt team compared to a lot of the Vanderbilt teams in the past. Last year, it felt like it had to be Ezra Monyon or it had to be Tyron Lawrence. It would have to be Scottie Pippen Jr. or Saban Lee. Now it kind of feels like it can be any one of 4 or 5 or 6 guys that can really step up, give this team 15 plus or a couple of different guys that score into double figures and give them that scoring output to where they put up 80 plus points a game, which has become a really consistent thing for them, despite them shooting just 29% from 3 coming into the day. So,
how many guys have they had hit double figures scoring this year? It's got to at least be 8 or 9.
Yeah, it's got to be a good 8 or 9 at least.
Yeah, so I think that helps. And it's interesting. I thought about asking him. It's like, well, I'll wait and see how it plays out in future games. But it will be interesting to see how they structure guard playing time, because tonight, again, you see a new starting combo in the backcourt. Then you see Edwards and Tanner come in at the same time. That's 4 guys who can basically run the point. You've also got Collins, who could probably handle the ball a little bit. One way to offset a size advantage is to get some easy buckets on the other end. We saw that baseball pass tonight to Hoggard from McLaughlin for the easy layup. And it will be interesting to see, do they play really fast? Do they try to maybe gas some teams and rotate guys in and out every few minutes to take advantage and maybe neutralize a little bit of that disadvantage in the paint, where if they get into a half-court offense, and teams pound it in on them, that there's a potential. I think you're going to see some teams could make them play, but that will be a way to offset it. And if you are deep at guard and run those guys a lot, I don't know. I'll be curious to see how that looks going forward.
Yeah, especially in SEC play too, because, there's not a whole lot of teams in this conference that run that type of style,
Yeah.
and there sure aren't many teams that have as many rotatable guards as Vanderbilt has. I think the most comparable, obviously to a higher level, would be Alabama and that Nate Oates offense with the high-flying, fast-paced, high-scoring offense. But even then, it's still a much different look to where Vanderbilt, they have 5 or 6 guards they can constantly rotate at any point depending on the matchup. Obviously do lack that interior presence. I think they would kind of hope maybe Jalen Carey starts to find his way a little bit. He struggled a little bit, I think, at least compared to what maybe we thought he could do, but I still think that he's another one of those players that has that extra level or two that we haven't seen yet.
No, I do too. Off season, just kind of looking through what guys had done other places. When he was on the floor at James Madison last year, he was super productive per minute he was on the floor. Again, back to I think there's another level in for some of these guys. I think he's tops of the list of maybe guys that I would say that about. We'll wait and see. I mean, we're 8 games in. And bottom line, they're 7-1.
Yeah,
it's not been it's not been Alabama's or Auburn's schedule, but this time a year ago, the last couple of years, they're losing games to Southern Miss and Presbyterian and God knows who. I mean, they've taken care of business. They've had one really bad game against Drake, which I think probably had a lot to do with Drake. But 7-1, I think you'll take it, given the point where Mark Byington took over when he took this job back in the spring.
Yeah, you mentioned the Drake thing too. Just a 9-point loss in a neutral site against a really tough undefeated team that I think maybe have caught a lot of people off guard. What Coach McCollum over there and they have done with a lot of those D2 transfers has been amazing. I wouldn't be shocked to see if Drake was a tournament team at the end of it. So despite the loss, and that was without Devin McLaughlin too for most of that second half, worst losses that you could take, especially considering some of the losses we've seen this program take over the last few years. Remember, still 2 really good non-conference opportunities with TCU and Virginia Tech upcoming. If we were looking at this team back in August and saying they're going to be 7-1 heading into December, I think most people would be thrilled with that.
Yeah, I think you would have signed up to take that. I think Drake was a good team. That they looked bad that night. That wasn't their best performance. I do think that had something to do with Drake, and they've also got a win over a Ken Palm top 40 team in Nevada too, which was kind of a bad matchup. That was a tall team. They slowed them down. Like, they're on paper, there's 2 things that are really problematic for them, and they won the game anyway. So anyway, 7-1 heading into November. I think you'll take it, and it's been a fun brand of basketball to cover too.
Yeah, which I think is really the biggest breath of fresh air for a lot of people surrounding this program, is that I think the last few years there just wasn't that same sense of excitement coming in. You kind of knew there were some pieces and there was some talent, but just that sense of really fun, exciting basketball to watch. I've not seen this much just feeling of that. Probably since around the late Kevin Stallings days, probably that 2015-16 team where they were ranked coming in.
Yeah, I mean, the first, and it was different. The closest was those first 4 games of the Darius Garland year. And Garland, gets 35 his last full game before Kent State, and unfortunately know what happened next. But that's the last time I think, they had the run in stacks next to last year where they played really well down the stretch in the SEC, got some big wins. But, it kind of felt like fool's gold, and it was. At least they have put on paper out there, for high school kids and transfers to see, hey, they play a fun brand of basketball here, and it's something they can recruit to for sure. Any parting thoughts, anything we didn't get to today?
Nothing really that comes to mind. Just really interested to see how this next game goes with Virginia Tech. Next home game is December 18th, so it'll be about 2.5, almost 3 weeks till they'll be back in this gym. But we could be looking at a very different resume for this Vanderbilt team with VT and TCU coming up. If they can at least go 1-1, I'm not saying this is a tournament team just yet. I still think they're an NIT team that can maybe host a game or 2. But if you get at least one of those wins, essentially on the road or at a neutral site, that I feel like maybe put them in position to maybe at least be in the conversation come January in what's a really tough SEC. If they can go 500 in the SEC and finish as just a 2-loss non-conference team, I think you're in the conversation with how tough this conference is, especially this year.
Yeah, no doubt. And it'd be an interesting homecoming for MJ Collins and Tyler Nickel and Blacksburg coming up. All right. Brandon, thanks for joining me. First time you and I have worked together. It's been a pleasure. Got to sit with you in the press box. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, really enjoyed it.
And Joey Dwyer, you were missed tonight. You got called out pre-press conference by Mark Byington. I think the words "no excuses" were uttered. So just you've been put on notice, Joey. You might have had your place taken here. All seriousness. seriously, I'm running out of gas here. Yeah, enjoyed it tonight. We did miss Joey, so he'll be back at it. We'll be back at it. Thanks for watching. Thank you to the Wash House, our sponsor for basketball season, for helping make this possible. For Brandon Bigsby, I'm Chris Lee. You've been watching the Vandy Sports Podcast.